today we are going to be learning about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, both of which are key processes in energy, both for energy storage and energy release. And energy is really important because it allows us to live. It keeps our muscles moving, it keeps our heart beating, it keeps us breathing, so that we can continue to survive and reproduce. So let's start with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is an energy storage process. And because it's an energy storage process, we're going to store the energy by taking light energy from the sun and using it to turn carbon dioxide and water into glucose. And glucose is a type of sugar, which is like food. So plants are taking light energy, carbon dioxide in from the air, water from their roots, and they're turning it into sugars, which can serve as food. So the reactants of this equation are the stuff that we start with. Our reactants are carbon dioxide, which comes from the air, in through pores in the leaves, and water, which comes from the roots or the surroundings if it's a single-celled organism like algae. So the 6 carbon dioxides and the 6 waters with some light energy get turned into, so this arrow indicates that it's turning into, we're recombining these different parts into one glucose molecule. This glucose molecule is C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen molecules, and the oxygen molecules are O2s. Since this is what we end up with at the end, we call these the products. It's what's produced in this reaction. And if you pay attention, you have 6 carbons at the beginning, and you have 6 carbons at the end. Because in a chemical formula, if the number at the end, at the bottom, the subscript, is how many of that element you have. So here it's C6, which means 6 carbons, and that's the same as these 6 carbons at the beginning. For hydrogens, at the beginning, you have 6 H2Os, so 2 times 6 gives me 12. And over here, I have 12 total hydrogens. And then at the beginning, I have 6 times 2 is 12 oxygens and carbon dioxide, and 6 times 1, if there's no subscript, it's like a 1, is 6. 6 plus 12 is 18, plus there is equal to 6 times 1, plus 6 times 2, so 12 and 6 is 18 again. So all my numbers add up. My reactants and my products match up nicely. So why are we doing this? We're doing it to create food so that I can store energy inside of plants or plant cells. The types of cells that are doing this are producers. Any plant cell could do it, any algae, any photosynthetic bacteria, basically anything that can do photosynthesis, shockingly, can do photosynthesis. Any producer. So generally in plants, they'll do it in the leaves. You won't see a lot of photosynthesis in the roots of plants because there's not a whole lot of light. So you can also tell that it's doing photosynthesis because it'll have a pigment in there. The pigment that it needs is chlorophyll, which is found in the chloroplast. There's actually other pigments that can also do some photosynthesis, but the main one is chlorophyll and in the chloroplast. So the cell organelle where all of this takes place is called the chloroplast. And in, say, leaves of trees, you're going to have lots of chloroplasts. All right, so this is just for producers. The other thing that cells do is called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. So cells take the sugar that they made in photosynthesis, they use some oxygen, and they break those apart to get energy back out. So when photosynthesis takes place, you're basically storing energy in the bonds between the atoms. So I'm taking the light energy, and I'm using that light energy to store in these bonds between the carbons. Then when I break those bonds apart in cellular respiration, I get that energy out, and I can use it for living things, like moving a muscle, keeping my heart going. So I'm going to break apart the glucose to get energy. That's an energy releasing process. So my reactant is I'm going to have the glucose plus 6 oxygens. That's going to turn into 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters. And then the other big piece that I've got my regular reactants in blue, glucose, oxygen. My products, which you'll notice are the exact opposite of the reactants and the products from photosynthesis. So I've flip-flopped. What was my reactants are now my products. What was my products now go into my reactants. And then the other thing that I'm adding in is creating a whole bunch of energy. And the energy is held in this molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and that's an energy holder. So it holds the energy so that I can use it in my cells to stay alive. I start with 36 ADP molecules, which are like partially full energy holders. Those are adenosine diphosphates, di meaning 2, it has 2 of the phosphates, and then it turns into ATP, adenosine triphosphates. All right, so which types of cells do cellular respiration? Since it is necessary to stay alive, all cells have to do cellular respiration. It's not just things that breathe. Every single cell, plant cells, animal cells, bacteria cells, all need to stay alive. So all cells are going to do cellular respiration. Where that takes place is in the cell organelle, the mitochondria. That one's called the powerhouse of the cell, and this is why it's called the powerhouse of the cell, because it creates all of the energy using ATP and using cellular respiration. So let's talk a little bit about what the heck ATP is. ATP is a type of energy holder, and the energy is held in molecular bonds. So with all chemical formulas, energy is held in the bonds between atoms. So like between C6H12O6, that's a lot of atoms, and they all bond together, and each of those bonds holds some energy. And another place where it's held is between the phosphate groups in ATP. So adenosine triphosphate, those 3 phosphates are held together by bonds, and that holds energy. So adding a phosphate or taking away a phosphate is a really good way to get some energy and then use that energy up. So ADP starts with an adenine, which is this 2-ringed structure here. You might recognize adenine because it's one of the bases from DNA. Adenine attaches to ribose, which is a sugar, and that ribose attaches to 2 phosphate groups. So I've got adenine, ribose, and then 2 phosphates, and that's called adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. Then I've got some energy that I want to store because I just broke apart one of those glucose molecules, and I've got this energy I need to store, and I've got an extra phosphate group. So I'm going to add my phosphate group onto the end of ADP. That creates a new bond, and that bond will hold energy. So I've got some extra energy in this bond to the 3rd phosphate. That bond right there, because this is a new phosphate, and now it's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So our big idea here is that ATP is the cell's temporary energy holder. ATP holds the energy for a short period of time, and then it's used for something that helps keep you alive. So that is why we're doing photosynthesis and respiration, to take the light energy from the sun, turn it into food that we can store, and then eventually use it again in cellular respiration to keep us alive. So we've got energy storage in plant cells and producers, and then energy release in all cells. So if animals want to get some of that energy release, we have to eat some plants to get some of those glucose molecules that we can then break down in cellular respiration. All right, stay energetic out there, and I will see you again soon.